Great. Wow. Is that better? To get things started, we've got some new commission members of our commission, and so I think it would be good just to go down the line and introduce ourselves to each other and everybody else that's in attendance. And this is also being broadcast to, so other state employees can view the meeting as well. So it's going to be recorded and it's live as well. So we'll start down at this end. Christy, you can go ahead and introduce yourself to everybody.
Hello, I'm Christy Racinas. I'm with the Wyoming Supreme Court, and I'll be the ex officio member representing the judicial branch.
Welcome.
And I'm Rita Meyer. I'm not new. I'm from the private sector.
I'm Dave Yurkides. I'm new. Some of you know me. I was a former administrator for A&I HRD. Pleasure to be on the board now.
Good to have Dave. Go ahead, Mr. Co-Chair.
Well, my name is Mike Madden, and I'm from District 40, which is in Johnson County. So this is about my 7th year, I think, on this board.
Okay. John?
Good afternoon. I'm John Cox. I'm the Director of Wyoming Department of Workforce Services. Pleasure to be here.
Welcome, John. And of course, I'm Ray Peterson, State Senator. I've been on this commission since I was a state senator, so it's been probably over 10, 12 years, something like that. I don't know. I've lost count. But welcome everybody here, and we'll begin. And first item on our agenda is basically reviewing our minutes from our April 10th meeting. Everybody had a chance to look at those, I hope. Any changes or discussion on the minutes?
I've reviewed the minutes, Mr. Chairman, and I'd move that we approve them.
Second.
Motion's been made, seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Minutes stand approved and accepted. Next item on our agenda, and I think probably the best way to handle this would probably just be to turn the time over and work us through the agenda. And I don't know if, Tricia, if you're the one that will be doing that, or if Dean, or is he?
I think we'll be splitting it up.
Okay.
And I believe Amy is here to talk about the Housing Authority information.
Allowance. Great.
If you could introduce yourself as well.
As long as you guys hear me? You can hear me? Okay. Mr. Chairman, I'm Amy Bittner, and I'm with the Economic Analysis Division. And I'm here to talk about an alternative housing, or an alternative assistance method that we were directed to calculate based on discussion from the previous compensation meeting that was back in April. So right now, the housing assistance calculation utilizes rental rate data collected that we collect for our Wyoming Cost of Living Index report. We were tasked to look at using different data that also comes from the Wyoming Cost of Living Index report. Specifically, within the Wyoming Cost of Living Index, within the Wyoming Cost of Living Index, we do have information, a table called the Comparative Cost of Living Index. Essentially, what that information does is it shows each county's cost of living compared to the statewide average. The statewide average is 100. So we utilized what we call the all items comparative cost of living index values for the counties over 2 reports. We produce the Wyoming Cost of Living Index for the 2nd and 4th quarter, so we do it twice a year. So utilizing that overall cost of living all items number, we determined what counties would qualify using this new data. And the all items, it looks at all cost of living beyond just housing. So based on our calculations, we used a methodology similar, for part of it, similar to what we use for the housing assistance. We created a threshold that a county must meet in order to qualify. That threshold is the standard deviation of the all items information from the counties, plus the statewide average. And I think you guys hopefully have the handout where it shows we averaged the all items index values for the counties over those 2 periods. So we use the second and fourth quarter 2014 cost of living index. So those are the average over those periods. We have the standard deviation and the statewide average. So we have this threshold to qualify, 109.47. Based on the information in the table there, Teton County is the only county that qualifies under this new assistance method. Once we had the qualification, we had to determine a dollar value, in order to determine potential assistance. So using other data from the Wyoming Cost of Living Index, specifically the housing weights data that we use within our report, we came up with an average household monthly expenditure. And based off that, and then the statewide average population weighted house rental rate, we were able to determine the monthly household expenditure. From the average monthly household expenditure, we then need to determine what amount of money that Teton, which in this scenario, this alternative method, was the only county that qualified. So we just took Teton County's percent above the statewide average, which in this case was 31.5%. We multiplied that by the average monthly household expenditure that we came up with, and we derived an assistance amount. And as you can see, we also included within the table towards the bottom the current assistance amount based on the current housing allowance policy. And as you can see, the amount derived under this alternative method, which incorporates more than just housing, other cost of living things, Teton County's amount was higher. So that's what we came up with based on the discussion from last time, some direction from Representative Madden.
Any question from the commission members?
Well,
Mr. Co-Chair.
I really appreciate you doing this, that I was just curious to see if there were other things in the cost of living that happens in these counties that also contribute to a higher cost. And, from the standpoint of the state, it looks like it's, number one, you can conclude that it's not just housing in Teton County that's a problem, it's other things too. And on the other hand, I guess with the exception of Converse County, the same counties are eligible for this, only in different amounts than what it was before. But by the same token, Converse County probably will not be in there again anyway. So,
well, in this method, Converse County did not qualify, whereas currently they are receiving a housing assistance.
Yeah.
So
you're right, and Mr. Chairman, what I was getting at is that next year when we go through this same exercise, we do that in the spring, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's at the next meeting.
Well, I'm pretty sure that Converse County won't qualify anymore, but then we'll all be the same either way, right? So I think it's a good exercise. We know that housing is the main contributor, and we're probably okay using it the way it is. That's my opinion. What do you think?
I really can't, I don't really have an opinion on it. This is just the data. It's just following,
Right.
using different data. I guess maybe the question needs to be asked, what is the problem you're trying to solve? Is it housing? Is it cost of living? Is it something else? So, looking at other things besides housing is what this particular calculation looked at.
But I would add, this whole adjustment was because of housing, in particular in Teton County, where state employees were expected to move there, and take up residence there, and the housing cost there was a lot higher. And of course, they were receiving the same wage rate as other state employees around the state. So this is why we have this housing allowance. But Chairman Madden brings that point up, and there are other costs that should be factored in too. But this was the whole idea, was the housing allowance to not penalize those state employees having to move to Teton County. And so there's this subsidy of trying to alleviate that concern. Any other commission comments or discussion on this?
Mr. Chairman, just a
John.
question of Amy. Amy, when you did this alternative analysis, do you have any sense, and I don't know if this is stepping off into something that is better asked now or not, but do you have any sense of how Converse County, is Converse County and Teton right now that are getting assistance?
The housing, just the housing, current under the housing allowance policy
Okay.
right now.
So you have a comparative between Teton under the existing formula and this alternative formula.
Mhm.
Do you have any sense of where Converse County would fall out today under the existing formula? I see here that it doesn't qualify under the alternative, but is it?
Are you talking about, so for the next time when we do the housing allowance, whether they would qualify?
Well, no, I'm actually talking about if you did that today, and if you haven't done that, that's fine, but did you recalculate it in any way to, or did you just simply compare to what was arrived at this past spring?
Well,
under
we
the
don't,
existing formula?
we don't, so for the housing allowance, we use data from the second and fourth quarter
Okay,
cost of living reports. The fourth quarter 2015 cost of living has not been done. So we
Okay.
don't have, that period of data. So I can't comment whether Converse County would get the housing allowance until that report, which is released at the beginning of April, and it has the other piece of data, which is we look at the house rental rates for Converse County, for all the counties to determine the housing allowance. So we don't have new data. That's why I had to base this on the 2014 reports.
okay.
Because we only have the second quarter 2015 cost of living. We haven't done the fourth quarter yet.
So it'd be likewise for Teton County then?
Yes, for all the
Using the older
counties.
data. Thank
yeah.
you. Thanks.
Okay. Further discussion on this topic with questions for Amy? One of the problems that this causes is those borderline counties that might qualify one year and then not the next year, and those employees being put in that position of receiving some assistance and then just not quite meeting that threshold and then losing that assistance. So that's always been a concern. And anything else, Amy, that you need to present?
No, unless there's more questions.
Okay. Hearing none. All right. Thank you. Good report. The longevity review. Who has that?
Mr. Chairman, I have that. My name is
Okay.
Tricia Bach. I'm the ANI HRD administrator. In the longevity report for 2015, there was a legislative session budget footnote requesting that ANI look at longevity and see if there was another way to formulate alternatives for longevity, whether that's being placed into compensation in the matrix, or if it's a separate line item in their paycheck as it is now. It includes incorporating the, increasing the dollar amount of longevity payments to the eligible state employees. ANI have done a report. We submitted that on November 3rd, and it'll be available after release by the JAC. So right now it's not available, but we did.
You're going to scoot that microphone just a little bit closer to you, Tricia.
We did supply that information to the JAC on the longevity report with
Okay.
multiple alternatives. So as soon as that's available, we will have that ready for you, once it's released by the JAC.
Okay. Further discussion or questions for Tricia on this particular report?
Mr. Chairman, I would just add that doing the report was kind of an interesting exercise because the longevity system has been in place. We went back and looked in the statutes as far as back as 1958. So the longevities have been in place for a long period of time. And So state employees have become very accustomed to longevities is the point I'm trying to make. And they have increased over the years. I think originally they started out at $10 a month, and we're currently at $40 a month with no cap for every 5 years of service with the state. So it's a great benefit to state employees, and currently about 64% of all state employees get a longevity of some type. So I think that's fairly significant. 5,458 employees get longevities. Obviously, they range from employees working 5 years to we have one employee who's worked for the state 55 years. So there's quite a spread of ranges there. It is interesting as we looked into it, just a little background data. The state does spend about $7 million a year on longevities for all of these increases. So it is a separate item to employees' pay, and the Joint Appropriations Committee did ask that we look into it with possibly the idea of increasing or changing the way longevities are distributed. So as Administrator Bach mentioned, we will be releasing that information to state employees and to the Comp Commission once that's finally released. But it's a very interesting exercise looking into all of that. And just to give you a little bit of comparison, we did look at what other states are paying for longevities and make those comparisons. So I believe you'll find the report very interesting.
Good. Any further discussion on this report?
Well, just one
One.
question. Is there ever an ending point to longevity where we say that you've worked long enough that longevity has exhausted itself for this person? I mean,
Representative Madden, that's a good question, and the answer is no. It is $40 for every 5 years of service with the state, with no maximum.
okay.
But we did look at those, and we will have some of those recommendations in our report to the Joint Appropriations Committee.
Okay. And that's what, the first or second week in December, or? Something like that.
A&I has our budget hearing with the Appropriations Committee, I believe, December the 8th.
Okay.
But they've not specified a time that they want to review this longevity report, so.
Okay. Further questions or discussion on this?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes,
one
Dave.
of the questions that was posed to me at some point in time was why the JAC was actually looking at longevity. Was there a purpose for the reduction or helping with the reduction of the budget, or to finding another mechanism in which to provide more funding for state employees? Did you get a sense from that meeting of what way it was leaning?
Commissioner Yerkes, I would just say that I can't speak for why the Joint Appropriations Committee was requesting that information. However, I do believe that they've been looking at compensation, not only the executive branch, but at the university and with school teachers, and trying to draw some comparison between them. There was never any indication in my mind that they were looking at reducing pay. In fact, the specific language that was put in the footnote of A&I's budget bill was to look at alternatives for increasing longevity. Obviously, longevity is driven by statute, so it would require some change to statute. But at this point, it's basically providing the committee with an analysis of longevities in the state, kind of a little bit of a history about them. And I believe that the Joint Appropriations Committee is very interested in studying compensation. So as we go through the rest of the meeting today, you'll see that they requested some other information looking at what we call total compensation. So they're not just looking at base pay, but they're looking at the entire salary package that state employees are receiving. So I actually welcome this as an opportunity to bring it in front of the legislature, to have the discussion, show them exactly where the longevity is going, how it's administered.
Thank you, Mr.
Okay.
Fawcett.
Anyone else? All right, that leads us into the next section then, the total pay report.
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to go through a high-level presentation that the Hay Group gave to the Joint Appropriations Committee I believe it was last June. And 2 years ago, the Joint Appropriations Committee asked A&I Human Resources Division to look into total compensation for state employees. And so there's always been a desire to better understand the difference between base pay and total compensation of state employees. So they directed us to look into that, and what we chose to do was to contract with the Hay Group. And we did that for several reasons. First of all, as you may recall, the Hay Group did the classification study of state employees in about 2008. So they were the ones who did the original salary surveys as far as setting up the pay tables and those kinds of items. So the intent is we were comparing apples with apples by having the Hay Group use the same methodology. So we contracted with the Hay Group, and they came in and they actually did a review of all state salaries, comparing them to different employers, as well as looking at the benefits for state employees. So that's the presentation that you have in front of you. It's called the Total Compensation Report. And so what they did is they just basically summarized on page 4, I'm now the history with the Hay Group. They talked about where we have been and the investment we have in the Hay system in the state of Wyoming. So in about 2007, wrapping up in 2008, we implemented the new pay tables in state government. And that was comprised by asking all state employees to update their job content questionnaires, which described their job. And we did an internal review to make sure that our classification structure was set up correctly. The second thing we did after we got everyone appropriately classified, the Hay Group then went out and did a salary survey of competitive employers to determine what the pay rate should be. So they did that. They created the pay tables that we currently have in existence. And they also looked at the benefits that state employees were receiving. And it was about in 2008 or 2009, the Hay Group actually did a benefit study for state government as well. So a lot of this was building upon the groundwork, if you will, that the Hay Group initially implemented when they implemented the system in 2008. Since then, of course, we improved the system by moving to a performance appraisal system where we're now appraising or evaluating state employees. And in the last few years, we've been distributing pay based on performance. So that's a little bit about the history of what's going on. Some of the significant concerns that the Hay Group brought to the Joint Appropriations Committee, which I find really to be interesting and I think are important to mentioning, is we know that we have a number of state employees who are currently eligible or will be eligible to retire in the next few years in state government. So this is not untypical as far as what other employers are seeing as basically the baby boomers are reaching retirement age and leaving the workforce, but it's also potentially going to have an impact on state government. And so one of the findings or concerns that the Hay Group expressed when we looked at where we're at with our current compensation and HR system in state government is kind of giving the state some warning that we need to be thinking about succession planning for all of these baby boomers that are going to be retiring. This just happened to coincide with a concern that the Joint Appropriations Committee mentioned as well. So we know that today there's probably 15% of state employees that are eligible to retire, but in the next 5 years that number will increase up to 30%. So it's going to be a significant number, and of course, those numbers change from year to year, but that is what we're projecting. The other point I'd make is that the Hague Group expressed concern that the state of Wyoming is going to need to make sure that we keep our pay policies competitive enough to attract new employees to work for the state. So as we have boomers who are retiring and we're planning for succession planning, if you will, the next thing we're looking at is will the state be in a competitive position to attract new workers working for the state? And the Hay Group did bring up a very valid point that it's not all just about base pay, it's about a mix of base pay and benefits, which we call total compensation. So that's what their report was highlighting. The third concern they brought is not untypical to what other employers are experiencing right now, and that's the rising care of health care costs and for employees and for employers. So this will be a significant issue that the state of Wyoming is going to have to face. We'll be talking a little bit about that later in this presentation, but those were the three primary concerns that the Hay Group brought up as they looked at this. So again, the conversation turns to what is the appropriate mix of benefits for state employees, and that's what their report highlights. So I would just point out, I'm on page 8 of their presentation, that they did go out and they did survey other employers to find out what other employers are making, and they made recommendations based on their survey that was conducted in 2013. And what they did is they looked at benchmark classifications, which means they identified key classifications in state government and went out and surveyed those jobs. So rather than surveying every state job, they surveyed 192 jobs, and those 192 jobs ironically represent 90% of all state employees. So they were able to get a good grasp on what the competitive pay for other employers are, looking at that. They came back with their benchmark survey, and I should mention that they looked at a number of salary survey resources. They looked at the Wyoming Hospital Association, so we were looking internally for Wyoming employers. They looked at the Mountain States Employer Council salary surveys. Those would primarily be salaries in the Front Range area, so it covers that. They looked at the Wyoming Department of Workforce Services surveys, and Workforce Services does two surveys. They're both wage surveys. They're building and construction prevailing survey, wage survey, as well as heavy and highway prevailing wage surveys. So they looked at a number of different sources, as well as the Hay Group has a database of data of other employers, not only in Wyoming, but across the United States. Additionally, Wyoming always compares itself to the National Association of State Governments, and we compare ourselves to 11 other states: Arizona, Colorado, Idaho, Montana, North Dakota, Nebraska, New Mexico, Nevada, South Dakota, Utah, and Washington. So we actually went out and surveyed, or used this survey tool that they have to compare state of Wyoming jobs with these other states and comparable jobs in other states. So the point I'm trying to make is this was a fairly robust survey, going out and surveying other state governments as well as surveying the Wyoming market, if you will. So they came up with a couple recommendations, or a couple findings, I should say, that are probably the most significant things of this report. On page 12 of the report, they looked at comparing Wyoming's median, market median, which is our market policy position, with others. And what they found, the findings of that data is that if we compare state of Wyoming employee salaries with salaries of other employers in the state of Wyoming. This would be within the state. What we find is that the state of Wyoming pays 13.3% less than other Wyoming employers. So let me say that again. If we compare comparable Wyoming state jobs to other jobs in Wyoming with Wyoming employers, the average pay is 13.3% less for state employees than the Wyoming employers are paying. This is significant because if we're looking at Wyoming as being one of our competitive market sources, and we see employees leaving state government to go work for Wyoming employers, it's simply pointing out that there is a gap in base salary between state employee salaries and what Wyoming employees are making in the private sector, private and public sector. The other comparison was to look at comparing Wyoming employees' base salaries with base salaries of other state employees in other states, and those were the states that I just read off to you. If we look at that comparison, we find that the Wyoming employees, their average median pay is about 8.2% above what other states make. So the takeaway from this is in the state of Wyoming, if we look within the borders of Wyoming, the median pay is 13.3% less. And if we look at other states, other state employees, other states, the average is 8.32% above. What that all equates out to, though, is if we aggregate that data together, we find out that Wyoming state employees are still, on an aggregate basis, their base pay is 5% less than the market. That's what the Hay Group's finding indicates. Now keep in mind, this study was done in 2013, and so you have to keep in mind that state employees have received pay raises over the last 2 years. They've not been across the board pay raises. They've been based on where they fall in the pay table as well as what their performance ratings were. But the point I'm trying to make is you're always chasing the market. So you do a survey, and then every year you need to go out and survey that data. But again, the key finding is this is base salary, and I'm going to get to total compensation next. So if we look at state of Wyoming employee benefits, and the Hay Group went out and looked at this, comparing ourselves with other employers, both within Wyoming and within other states or at other states, we find that in general, the biggest benefit that state employees get is their retirement and their health care. Those make up the biggest percentage of dollars for employees as far as benefits. When we look at state employees' current benefits for retirement and health care, this would be the amount of money that the state contributes to the employee's portion of their pay. We find that Wyoming state employees are in the top quartile of other employers. So we're above the average. In fact, we're in the top quartile. So I think that's a key finding. We don't have an exact percentage, but the key is that we're in the top quartile both within Wyoming and in other states. So we would be, our retirement and our health care benefits in particular are better than most Wyoming employers and employers in other states. So that would be the takeaway on that. When we look at the other benefits that state employees receive, we find that as far as disability insurance, we're at the median, we're about average. If we look at life insurance, it kind of spans the range because life insurance is based on your age, and we fall everywhere from the bottom quartile up to the third quartile. And if we look at other types of benefits, which would include holidays and other types of leave were basically at median or lower. So the key takeaway from this is, in particular, state employees are in the top quartile based on the employer's payment for their retirement and their health insurance benefits. If we move on then to page 14 of the presentation, this is kind of the climax or the summary of what the Hay Group's findings were. In aggregate, the state's total compensation is above the state's market median, meaning that in aggregate, if we look at both base pay and benefits, state employees are making about 16.1% more than what other state employees are making in other states. However, if we look at Wyoming employers, we're 2.2% below the median as far as what other employers are paying within the state of Wyoming. So I think the takeaway from this is a couple of things, at least from my perspective. Number one, the Hay study did exactly what we were hoping it to do. We're moving people closer to the market policy position. The other thing is that we have a lot of time, money, and energy invested in the Hay system, and we want to keep the Hay system whole and moving forward. I think, in my opinion, it would be unfortunate if the state used another methodology right now to look at the way we do pay in the state of Wyoming. We've got a number of years that we've been building upon this base, if you will. So what we're hoping is to keep the Hay system, as we call it, in place in state government, keep refining it, keep building it, keep going and doing market surveys to be competitive with what other employers are paying their employees, to make sure that the Wyoming employees are not falling as far behind as they were. But overall, I think the key message is that if we look at where Wyoming state employees are, again, their total compensation, if we look at Wyoming employers, is 2.2% below. And if we compare comparable positions in other states, their pay is 16.1% higher than what other states pay. And this is total compensation looking at both base pay and looking at benefits.
Yep, go ahead, John.
Mr. Chairman, Dean, with respect to the last statement you made there, I'm looking at page 14 where it shows, in comparison to the state's market, the total compensation Wyoming state employees are plus 16.1%. Is that based on the assumption that we would be paying at median? Is that compared or based on an assumption of paying at MPP?
It is, and thank you for that clarification. That footnote is on here. So what they would be doing is they would be comparing the base pay of employees, assuming that they were all paid at the market policy position.
Mr. Chairman, follow?
You bet.
Dean, can you, do you have a sense of where, in aggregate, the Wyoming state employee workforce is with respect to MPP?
We did an analysis last year, I believe, and on aggregate, we're finding that state employees are moving closer to the market policy position. And obviously, we have some occupational groups that are closer to the market policy positions than others. But on aggregate, we're finding that we are, if my memory serves me correctly, about 6% away from the market policy position.
Thank you.
And further, I would add to that is when we look at going out and looking at the trends as far as what other employers are paying, we see that the trend is basically around 3 to 4% other employers are increasing pay per year. So the point I'm trying to make is that was the analysis based on the 2013 data, but as we look now, and we've got a couple years behind us, those numbers keep changing. But what it does illustrate is that where we started when we implemented the Hay Group to where we're at today. We're much better. And I would also remind the Compensation Committee that it was 2 years ago that we changed the pay tables, and we also moved the market policy position up. So we're always chasing that market policy position, if you will.
Thanks.
Any further questions from the committee regarding this report?
Just a short one.
Representative Madden.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, did the Hay Group point out that when you look at that 2.2%, that I'm assuming that's well within measurement error, isn't it? I mean, it's not much different than saying we're right on par with other employers when we consider benefits. 2.2%, that could be a statistical anomaly or something, right?
Correct. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a couple comments based on what Representative Madden mentioned. The first one would be that 2.2% is an aggregate across all occupational
Right.
groups. So as we look into the recommendations of the Hay Group, we have to be mindful that there are some jobs that are further from market than others. So what we always want to do, and one of their recommendations is for the state to be successful, we're going to have to look at several things. We're going to have to look at those occupational employees that are further from the market policy position to move them along. And secondly, we're going to have to identify the hard-to-fill jobs in state government, because there are many jobs in state government that we're having difficulty recruiting and filling. So in those cases, we may have to look at paying above the market policy position or paying better than we are today. And again, another one of the concerns that the Hay Group has is retirement. As employees retire, we're going to have a salary package that's going to attract employees to come work for the state of Wyoming. And it may not be that we're just trying to attract employees who are right out of college per se, but we're trying to attract employees that have experience, which means that we're going to have to pay them above the minimum of the salary range to attract that experience. A couple other recommendations that the Hay Group made that the Human Resources Division is in process of working towards is there really is a wonderful story here for state employees to hear that the state does pay very well for their benefits. And one of the recommendations that the Hay Group made is we should be promoting that more to state employees. So Administrator Bach will be talking about that in a minute, but we are proposing that we give all state employees if I could just describe it as a benefit sheet, which lists their base salary, and then from their base salary it goes on and lists their benefits that their employer pays for them. And in many cases, I think what we have found is that if you look at employees' pay, employees, almost 40% of their total compensation is based on benefits. That's an approximate number. But what we want to do is communicate that message to state employees that the state is paying quite well for their retirement and their insurance benefits. So again, we'll be showing you what we're proposing that we send out. But that is one of the recommendations that the Hay Group did make, and one that we intend on following up with them as well. The other recommendation from the Hay Group, which we are considering at this point, is the Hay Group is of the opinion, and this is obviously a policy decision that we're going to have to look at, but they're of the opinion that the benefits we have today and the mix of benefits that we have today may not be the mix of benefits we want for the future. So in other words, if you're going to attract the millennial generation to work in state government, they may not be as interested in retirement as they are in cash for other types of benefits. So one of the recommendations that the Hay Group made that we're giving some consideration to and exploring a little bit further is whether state employees should have an ability to choose the mix of benefits they're receiving. It would still be the same dollar amount, but maybe they could receive less for insurance benefits and get more in cash, or maybe there's even the possibility that there's other benefits that the younger generation would find more valuable than the current benefits that we offer. So I think that is a very interesting and well thought out position, and one that we want to explore further is, if you will, how can we make the right mix of benefits that would attract state employees to come work for the state. In other words, one size of benefits for a millennial may not be the same as a baby boomer, for example. They may have different desires. So we are looking at whether there's any ability to define how employees could mix up their benefits. But that is obviously going to take quite a bit of work to explore that. And but it does fit in very well with that whole issue. If we're going to be an employer of choice, we have to find the right ways of attracting people to work for the state of Wyoming. So perhaps we can look at the same amount of dollars that are allocated, but we just have to figure out how we could distribute them differently. So I think that really does open up a lot of doors and opportunities to have some very interesting conversations on benefits and salaries in the future. So,
Did our director just call out the millennials as being short-sighted? Is that what I heard? Translate?
if I said that, I apologize. That's the furthest thing from the truth.
I concur.
Well,
Any other questions for Dean on this report?
well, Mr. Chairman, I have a question as much as a comment. And you know, if you look at benefits, there's benefits that accrue from benefits that is enjoyed by the employer as well as the employee.
Correct.
When I was 23 and 25 years old, I didn't think I was ever going to get sick, and I didn't think I was ever going to retire. So if you had posed this question to me about what mix of benefits do I want, I probably would have said, well, cancel all that stuff and add on some vacation time for me, you know. And all I'm saying is that there's a reason why we have retirement from the standpoint of public policy. That we don't want people that retire from the state sleeping under bridges when they retire, and we don't want people being neglecting their health care while they're under our employee. And the list goes on and on. All I'm saying is you don't take that to the limit when you start talking about this cafeteria style of choosing benefits.
Representative Madden, I couldn't agree more with you. I would just add to that as we look into this, we find out that other employers are offering benefits that the state of Wyoming hasn't even discussed yet. So there are opportunities here and conversations to have, because again, if we're competing with other employers, we're going to have to look at what those benefits are. One example, and I'm not at all advocating or suggesting this, but one example that the Hay Group gave to me when we were looking at this is that we know that a lot of the new employees that come working for the state have huge college debts. And so what we're finding is that a lot of employers allow them to defer some of their benefits or some of their compensation to pay off those college debts. So I only give that to you as an example of how we need to be proactive as far as looking at our benefits. Sure. I don't think there's any state employee that would say that they don't like the retirement or the insurance benefits they're getting. But I think at the end of the day, the question is if you have X number of dollars for benefits, do we allow employees the opportunity to figure out how they choose to divide them? So those will be conversations that I anticipate we may be bringing to this comp commission in the future.
And Mr. Chairman.
Dave?
One of the things I've had the privilege, now that I've been outside of my previous position, was to speak with a lot of the students at the University of Wyoming. And I think you hit the right target of mix of benefits for the new students that are coming out. That is their biggest concern, is their student loans. And yes, we have a great benefit package on the retirement side, on the health side, but they need the cash to be able to keep up with their payments on their student loans. And I applaud A&I for the fact that that's what we're looking at, because that seems to be the strength of what's needed to employ the younger generation coming out of the universities.
Dean, I just had one question on that 13.3% of comparison on the median income with the other state or other salaries being paid throughout the state in the private and public sector. My concern is they're just apples to apples. Wyoming always gets a bad rep because a lot of our jobs here in Wyoming are construction or oil or gas or, the men and women out there on the rig today, and with the wind and the cold during the winter months. And whenever we do these comparisons, it's skewed just a little bit because there are so many differences in those types of jobs and the pay salaries. And so it's always tough for Wyoming to compare within our own state because of that disparity. Do you, in your mind, was this an apples to apples comparison, or is this always going to be the case of 13.3% difference in that we're behind because we're comparing to jobs that are, quite frankly, higher paying jobs that we'll never compete with?
Well, Senator Peterson, I think that's a great question. I believe that we are comparing apples to apples. So if we believe that we're just comparing ourselves to employees that work in the minerals industry, for example, that is part of the survey, but that is not the complete survey. So if we look at what's comparing ourselves to other employers in the state of Wyoming, within the state, we're also looking at hospitals, we're looking at school districts, we're looking at car dealerships, we're looking at retail, we're looking at the full gamut of occupational groups in the state of Wyoming. So I agree with you that it could well be that the minerals industry is driving a lot of this, but I think the fallacy would be that they're driving all of it, because what we're finding is that we're all competing for the same employees, and so we hear stories of state employees leaving state government to go work in the minerals field, for example, because they can make more money. That may have been the case a while back. I don't know if that's still the case today. So we know it's very cyclical. But again, I think the point that this report is making is on an aggregate, if we look at pay, not only Wyoming employees, but employees within the state of Wyoming are being paid well compared to employees in other states.
Yeah. Yeah, go ahead, John.
Go ahead.
I just can't speak volumes enough about this Hayes study. I was involved in that when I was on appropriations, like you say, from 2008 and sometime before, but I think it woke us up as a state and gave us some direction as far as how we were going to handle these pay increases and compensation for our employees and how we compete with not just surrounding states, but like you say, the jobs that we compete within our state. So I think we're on the right track here, and it's always good to take a step back and review and look at it and see where we're at. So I applaud the efforts and the report. John?
Mr. Chairman, just to add a comment that really is speaking to only a percentage of the state workforce, but those that are in blue-collar, skilled blue-collar occupations working for the state, I would certainly say that within the context of those jobs, that is a apples-to-apples comparison with the oil field and with the mineral industry, and I can also emphatically tell you that they're not competitive. That the anecdotal accounts of job loss or of employee loss to the private sector, and those areas are really reality on the ground for the state agencies that have blue-collar employees. And that's a cyclical thing, too. When in fairness, what you see is when the mineral industry is in need of workers, oftentimes that makes it very attractive for state workers to leave, go to work there. And when the down cycle occurs, then oftentimes there's a lot of applications for the same jobs at the state, or similar jobs at the state level.
Yeah. And we've all been through that turnover and the problems that causes, so we want to try to avoid that as much as possible. So, any further questions or discussions on this? Anything else, Dean, to present on this subject?
I think on your next tab, I think Administrator Bach is going to talk a little bit about this total compensation worksheet that I was referencing.
And it's under your tab after the Hay study. Mr. Chairman, one of the things, one of the things when I first started as an administrator was I saw this in one of our meetings, and it's not something that I've ever seen in an employee's paycheck before, to understand what your compensation really encompasses. And I think it's, as the Hay study recommended, that we put this in in one of the paychecks to show an estimate of each individual employee, what their monthly salary is, what their benefits, what their total compensation package is. I think it shows, at least to some employees who don't think about the total package, how much the benefits encompass their salary. So if they're paid, if it is 6% below MPP, or if they're at MPP, here is a one-page sheet that shows them, okay, you might be only making $4,454, but when you look at the total compensation, that is about 60% of your total compensation, which works out to be about $7,100. I think that's an eye-opener for employees, and I think it's very beneficial for them to see, and that's something we would like to do in the paychecks in the future, to show employees that, you do see your salary every month, but you don't see this total compensation worksheet. So, and that's on that next page. You can take a look at it. I won't go through every little number. Dean, do you have anything else to add to that?
I would just add to this that this example that you have in front of you is the average pay of state employees. So the average pay of all state employees, the average salary is $4,454 a month. And then if you look at that, the total benefits that employee receives is $8,700, about $8,700. So you see the total compensation package is almost $7,200 for that employee. And I think that many times state employees don't think that there's a cost associated with a holiday benefit, with a sick leave benefit, with other days off. And I think that's one thing that this report is really trying to illustrate. The other thing that we're hoping is that this report can be used as a recruitment tool. Yeah. So when you're looking at bringing in an employee to work for the state, for example, and they see the salary is $4,400 a month, and they go, well, I'm making $5,500 a month at the mine or wherever they're working, then you can go one step further, but then the state also offers these benefits, and if you look at it, this would be your total compensation, and let's take that and compare that to your current job and see if this is the right approach for you. So I would hope that this would be something that we currently have it on our website where an employee could go in and calculate it themselves. This is not something completely new, but I personally would like to see this as something that is handed to every employee once a year. Ideally for me, it'd be when you're doing your taxes and trying to look at a yearly glance of where you're at. But again, it just illustrates in a very clear manner what the employee is making and the benefits that the state is paying to their paycheck. And I find that as a huge tool, not only for the employee, but again, as we go out and look at recruitment. So we're looking at ways of possibly distributing this to state employees in coming months.
Good. Any comments on this from committee? Okay, we'll move on. Next item is up, the Affordable Care Act. And what is the state doing?
Mr. Chairman.
That's a good question.
It is a good question, and the state has been busy. The AG's office, ANI, the state auditor's office have been working jointly to make sure that we're in compliance with the Affordable Care Act. We have been meeting with, in conjunction with the AG's office, with each agency, going over exactly what's required, what the state is going to do. The state of Wyoming will begin offering single employer contribution. That's health, dental, life insurance benefit for all at-will contract employees and for temporary employees effective January 1st, 2016. How that works is the AWAC employees who are expected to work at least 80 hours will be offered this coverage. That's a requirement. That's a little bit better of a requirement that's asked under the ACA, but that's where it has been determined 80 hours is what we're looking at. That'll happen on the first day of the month following their service. Now, when it comes to the temporary employees, or the TPO1s, who are expected to work at least 80 hours, they're eligible on the first day of the month after 3 full calendar months of employment. So everybody at that point will have a single coverage for health, dental, life insurance benefits. TPO ones that work 80 hours a month that have not had a break in service, they will be eligible that first month following their employment, as well as the same as the AWAC employees. We've been going around and getting the information out to the agencies. We're in what I would think is pretty good shape. We're getting a lot of contracts amendments through the AG's office. We've probably, I would say we're about 40 to 60% through our office. So the AG's office contracts unit is working diligently to get those contracts amended so that the ACA is represented in that contract. We see every one of those contracts, so I've been signing a lot of contract amendments, and I would say that we're probably somewhere between the 40 and 60 mark there. I expect to see quite a few in the next 6 weeks to get those done. We also sent, HRD sent out letters to each of existing AWAC and temporary employees notifying of the change and what's coming up January 1st. So that's also been done, and that was done about 4 weeks ago. So EGI, which is the group insurance, instituted their changes in their benefit specialist booklets. So that's all up to date and ready to go. With the AG's office, we're just in the process of amending those contracts. So we're kind of at the end of getting everybody on board with the ACA. We're ready to go with that on January 1st.
Good.
Mr. Chairman, if I could just add to that, this is not a choice that we have. This is a requirement of the federal government. So the way it currently works is that in 2015, 70% of our employees have to be offered what the federal government defines as affordable insurance. Where that changes is in 2016, which is coming up in just a few months, 95% of our employees have to be offered affordable insurance. If we don't, and we've been working very closely with the auditor's office, and they're the ones that are actually going to be having to produce these reports to the IRS. If they find that the state of Wyoming is not at that 95% threshold, then there's a severe penalty every month that the state will have to pay. So all of this work is in advance of pulling off that penalty that employers will have to pay. So again, it's not a choice. It's a very expensive endeavor. The group insurance program, we're currently going through open enrollment. So as Administrator Bach mentioned, we've contacted every one of these employees and given them the option. But we can also be penalized if we don't give them the option. So you have to make great efforts to reach out to employees to make sure that they were offered affordable insurance. So that is taking place, and we believe that at the end of November, we will know how many more contract employees and temporary employees the state as employer is going to have to pick up their employer's share of the benefits, of the insurance benefits. So that is going to be an additional cost that the governor and the legislature are going to have to appropriate this year to cover the employer's share of the benefits for these contract and temporary employees. So again, we're taking this very seriously, and I can't even begin to describe how much work within the Human Resources Division, the State Auditor's Office, the Attorney General's Office, the Budget Division, and the agencies have gone into making sure that we've got all of this in place by the end of this calendar year.
Oh, that's the dumb question. Weren't all of our state employees offered, that's the key word, offered, at the time of employment? I mean, as they decide on what their paycheck is going to be, what benefits they want to accept or reject, was that offer made at the time of employment usually?
They are, except traditionally, contract employees were not offered insurance. So our classified employees are offered insurance, but not our contract
Gotcha.
employees. So that was a change in the ACA, that we have to look at contract employees. And then additionally, we have to look at temporary employees who are working, how many months?
80, or
80
3
hours
months.
for 3 months?
3 months.
3 months. There's a lot of numbers here, but we have to make sure that they are also offered insurance. Now, just because we offer insurance to employees doesn't mean they're all going to accept it.
Right.
So it just happened to be that as we're going through open enrollment now, we have a great opportunity of actually identifying which employee and which the cost is going to be. But again, that is going to be a cost that the state is going to have to pick up to pay for this insurance if employees elect to have insurance benefits.
And there
So-
were approximately 600 letters out, so that's about the amount on the contract. in temporary.
600?
Mhm. Yes.
Representative Madden.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have been made aware of the fact that, given our insurance that we offer state employees, that it's so good that we're going to be subject to a penalty for having too good of insurance. And they call it a Cadillac tax. And you've been talking here about making sure that we're offering affordable health insurance. And I was under the impression we're going to have to pay this tax unless we would switch some of the burden of the cost to the employee, I should say, to get under that Cadillac tax, because that was, somebody quoted me millions of dollars we're going to have to pay because we're offering too good of insurance. Our discussion today with you both is saying that we have to make sure it's good enough. And I'm not much of a fan of this Obamacare. It's not affordable, but yet we call it that. Where are we headed on that? Have you studied how much it's going to cost us for this Cadillac insurance if we don't change our benefits and lower them?
One of the things, there's a little bit of a miscommunication about Cadillac tax, which may happen in 2018.
Right.
And that is dependent on a lot of factors and whether that's even going to be there in 2018. And then there's this idea that the state of Wyoming offers a Cadillac plan. The way that our insurance is, and we have looked at that, is that based on mountain states and almost all the states that Dean listed earlier in the total compensation package, we are right in the middle with other states on our insurance. So we don't have a Cadillac plan, which people talk about, we have a Cadillac plan or not. We have an average plan based on the states. And that has to do with your deductibles and also the out-of-pocket payments. So there's the Cadillac tax is different from whether it's a Cadillac plan. I think it's been brought over because of the excise tax, which is what the Cadillac tax has been named. And that happens in, like I said, 2018. That's not something that we're sure that is even going to be there. And if you look at our plan, and if you look at actually everybody's plan, and Dean could probably talk a little bit more about this, if we're in the middle with all these states, we're all going to be, the entire country is going to be in the same boat.
Right, I know
Right,
that.
so it's not a situation where we have a Cadillac plan, we have an average plan. And it depends on whether the 2018
Yeah,
excise
that's
tax is going to
judge.
happen.
John, you got a question?
Mr. Chairman, so Trish, do you have a feel for if that Cadillac tax was imposed today, would Wyoming's benefits to state employees rise to that threshold? Do we know that?
I would
Or
not be
they-
able to answer that, but Dean might be able to talk to that a little more.
Again, a lot of this is being defined, so this is some time off, but we've been looking at it. And what we know is that I'm trying to find here real quickly, the threshold is based on an individual coverage and a family coverage. So there's two thresholds that you may have to cross. And as I understand it, it's $10,200 for individual coverage and $27,500 for family coverage. So those are large dollars there. But there, as Administrator Bach has mentioned, there's many employers that pay the employees' retirement or insurance benefits at this level. So this is not untypical. But what we don't know is if that's going to continue forward, and we can only estimate at this time. So I think you have to be cautious when you throw out these numbers because we don't know what that's going to look like several years down the road. It could all change, but I think a couple key points here is that this is not only going to affect state employees, but this is also going to affect the University of Wyoming. This is going to affect the community colleges, this is going to affect the school districts, and ultimately your local counties and city governments. So it's going to be an impact on everyone, as well as the ACA is. But we're looking at costs that potentially could be up there in the $4 million range for a Cadillac tax. I only throw that out as a rough estimate because we're still working to figure that out. But again, as Administrator Bach pointed out, it's not that we have an extremely rich insurance plan. We have a good insurance plan, but so do many other employers. So this is a way that the federal government can tax employers to continue to fund the ACA and insurance for other employers.
And it just dawned on me, Mr. Chairman, I did have a discussion with Ralph Hayes with EGI, and right now we are under the threshold, but just under the threshold. So those numbers for the 27,000 and the 10,000, we're under those numbers, but that could change in 2 years. Those numbers, I assume, will go up, as well as our numbers will go up. So we're just under that threshold at this time. And I do remember having that conversation with Ralph, so.
But this is obviously something that we're going to be monitoring very closely after we get through the ACA. Now we're going to be looking at the excise tax, and we'll have a lot of research and calculation to do. And I anticipate this will be a conversation we'll have with the commission for the next few years.
Yeah. Okay. Good question, though. Moment of discovery for me. I thought I was in pretty good shape, but I'm not driving a Cadillac. I get out now and I'm like, whoa, what a piece of junk I've got.
Mr. Chairman.
Rita.
Director Fawcett, I need to be reminded again. So I'm a state employee, I'm a professional, I'm a doc, I make $120,000 a year in the system versus somebody that makes $60,000. The coverage for a family is the same cost. So that's going to be the next gotcha from the federal government, is the sliding scale for health care premiums, I'll betcha. or a lot of these kickers are gonna kick us.
That's a very good observation, Ms. Meyer. What we look at it is the benefit, depending on what your total salary is, for an employee that is in the lower end of the pay range or makes a lesser salary, the insurance benefit is huge, because that makes up more than the 40% of their salary in many cases. But if you're the doctor that you mentioned, or somebody that's making a larger salary, it's really not as much as far as a percentage as their increase, because everyone is getting paid the same amount, or the employer is paying the same amount for every employee, no matter where they're at on the pay range. So those are great observations, and they're things that we're taking into consideration. But for one person, it may be a Cadillac, and for the other, it may be a Pinto.
We had a Pinto.
That ages
just
you,
told my
Dean.
age.
Pinto.
Well, we appreciate the efforts. I know we all know it's a moving target, and it's something that a lot of things are out of our control, but and it's frustration setting in for most everybody that has health insurance or used to have health insurance. So appreciate the efforts. Any other questions or discussion? Hearing none. Ready to move on. If there's nothing else to present in that area. Update on the July 2015 distribution.
Mr. Chairman, I'll take this one as well. There's a tab in your book, and I don't know if we have it on overhead, but what I wanted to do was review with you where we're at with our distribution of pay with state employees. If you'll recall, the legislature several years ago appropriated about $14.5 million for employee compensation over the biennium. So we had just a little over $7 million for each fiscal year. Out of that $7 million, though, we did have to give a equal percentage to the courts. So state employees did not get the full $7 million. It was closer to 6.5 to 6.7 million for state employee distribution. But what this chart in front of you demonstrates, if you recall, the way that we're distributing pay to state employees is based on where their pay is in relationship to the market. And we've been spending a lot of time today talking about markets. So the theory is that employees who are better performers and furthest from market will receive larger percentage increases. And again, I think that this structure that we've implemented has been very successful, moving people closer to the market policy position. But what we found is in 2015, if we look at employee pay distributions, if we look primarily at performance distributions, we see that there was about 55% of all state employees were rated as commendable or meets expectations. 22.5%, I got that wrong. 55.5% were rated as competent or meets expectations. 22.6% were commendable, and 7% were superior. So what we're seeing is that the majority of our state employees are competent and meeting expectations, and because of that, they're still getting pay raises. And that was the key of what we were trying to build with the position and range matrix that we have. So if you look at this table in front of you, you see that at the top line, you see the number of employees in each one of those quartiles, and you see the percentage of pay increases that they got. The takeaway of looking from this table is that some employees got nothing. They didn't get any increase. That was because either there was no evaluation, they could have been a probationary employee, for example, or their performance was needs improvement or growth necessary, so they would get 0% increase. Whereas the person that was the superior performer in the agency and the one that was the furthest from market was getting 5.3% increase. So the takeaway is the range is from nothing to a high of 5.35%. The average, I believe, when I looked at this, the average increase was just about 2.8%, I believe. Is that correct, Lori?
If you don't take the zeros, it's 2.93, or if you add all the zeros in it, it's 2.5.
Okay, so you see that would be the average of all state employees, but I wanted to point out the range. And the key takeaway is that state employees have received pay increases the last 2 years based on the money that the governor recommended and the legislature appropriated for pay raises, and we use this methodology to distribute the pay. And by and large, I think after 2-3 years in the process, we've done as much as we can to go out and educate people how this pay matrix works. I believe that people are beginning to understand it, adopt it, and we even have the Joint Appropriations Committee asking us questions about the distribution now. So I think folks are being able to understand it. I think you have another sheet in your packet that shows the number of employees. Well, I told you that the top percentage increase was 5.35%. I think the next page shows that there were 31 employees statewide that got that increase. So I just wanted to point out that not everybody was receiving those increases, and the average was more about a 2.6 to 2.7 area. Any questions on the distribution of pay and how we're distributing pay?
Any questions from the committee? I was hoping that no evaluations would be a little lower than 12%, but
Again, Mr. Chairman, those are primarily probationary employees that don't have 1 year of service with the state who are not eligible for the increase. So it would be consistent of what we find every year.
okay. No further questions or discussion on that? We can move on. Thank you. Next item is that PMI 2014-215. Did we just cover that?
I did. I would just like to make a few additional points on that. We've had the State of Wyoming PMI system, Performance Management Information System, in place for going on 4 years now. And it's been an evolving process. And the thing that I'd like to remind the Commission of is we look for ways to streamline the system to make it better, and we're continuing to do that. One of our focuses over this past year has been working with supervisors at the beginning of the appraisal period to write better goals for the employee throughout the year, things that they can achieve. So the Human Resources Division has done an excellent job going out, meeting with supervisors, giving them training, and we've trained over 177 supervisors just recently on the process. And I always believe that to have a successful performance management system, it always starts at the beginning by writing good goals at the beginning so that you can evaluate employees at the end. So that's been where our focus has been, as well as technology. We're completely paper-based at this point, paperless at this point with doing our evaluations. And one other point that I would make is that we keep adding on to the performance management system, at least the electronic components of this. And one thing that we will be giving you more information about at the next Compensation Commission meeting is we're now going to start asking questions in that system based on succession planning to help us plan as supervisors are meeting with employees to identify the critical positions in the agency that we have to make sure we have somebody trained and ready to step up for. So we'll be sharing more information with you about that in the future. But the sheet that you have in front of you, which I think is fairly significant, everyone is always concerned that we're going to see a huge rater creep, which means every year employees are going to get rated higher and higher, and pretty soon everybody's going to be superior. What we did is, for you, we compared 2014 to 2015, and we actually found out that's not the case. And so what that is demonstrating is that supervisors are taking this system very seriously. It also is getting across the message that an employee that is competent should be rewarded for doing a good job that's competent. So if you look at this bar sheet, you see that for a competent rating, the numbers between 2015 and 2014 are just almost identical. So I think that shows a little bit of what's going on. If we look at commendable and superior ratings, we find that they're up just a tick. But the reason is that there were more employees that were evaluated in 2015 than 2014. So that doesn't strike us as very alarming at this time. So overall, I would think that the PMI system, the performance management system, is doing everything that we had hoped that it would accomplish, and especially for pay distribution.
Okay, any further discussion from the committee on this? Okay, moving on then, our reclassification process. Tricia, you got this one?
I do.
All right.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One of the things that has come up over the years with HRD and reclasses or evaluations of occupations has been that an agency will call down to ANI HRD and ask for an occupational study, for example, of maybe HR personnel or driver services at YDOT. What happens is, on the HRD side, we say, okay, we're going to take that, we're going to run with it, we're going to do an occupational study. If that occupational study comes out that the majority of these people are going to move one class, move up from an 8 to a 9, or move down, majority of them move up from an 8 to a 9 or a 7 to an 8. Once that study's done and it's released, ANI, HRD really, that's their job, they're done. The problem is you have budgets to consider when you do that. So what we are doing and trying to implement now is working, HRD and the budget division working very closely together. When there is a request for an occupational study or a reclass, there is a new form to fill out to say how your agency is going to pay for this reclass. For example, if you ask for an HR person that you believe is not classed properly, or if you're moving somebody from one class to another, you're going to have to show ANI HRD and budget that you can afford to do that if there's going to be a change. And as everybody knows, or most people know, vacancy savings is not an option. So we have worked very closely with the budget division. Kevin and I have worked closely even in the last couple weeks on things that come down, coming out with a new form for agencies to fill out. And we hope that that's going to save a lot of the heartburn that a director may have and say, okay, that's great. HRD says that we need to reclass them, or we wanted to reclass them, but now how are we going to pay for it? They're not going to help us pay for it. It has to come out of their budget. So we're hoping with that collaboration that we work with that on the front end. Before you go through a study, have everything done, present it to the agency. Here it's all done, everybody moved, you're looking at $600,000 difference. Then trying to figure out how to pay for it, or not being able to pay for it after all of your employees just kind of have the idea that they're moving. So that's something that our office and the budget office is working on together, and we hope that that's going to alleviate some of the problems with budget with agencies and doing reclasses. And there's a new form to fill out. It's not really a new form. There's additional questions on the new form. And it seems to be working, at least on the couple that have been done prior to the freeze. It seems to be working well.
It's always a great question. How's it going to be paid for?
Right. And now we're just going to do it up front. And And in the past, as you could understand, the HRD department, they don't even think about the money part of it. They're looking at the classification, the employee, what are they doing, what is their job description. So now it makes more sense to really work in collaboration with the budget office so that there's no big surprise to a director, to an employee, to the budget division when they all of a sudden have a $600,000 difference in agency's budget.
Yeah. John, got a question?
Mr. Chairman, first of all, I want to say thanks to A&I for, and I realize this is a collaborative effort within the agency with budget, because I know that it's had to have been a heartache for you all along the way, and I know it has been at the agency level. My question is probably hypothetical and maybe a wish list, but if some combination of magic came together where agencies were able to budget for their positions at the MPP, what impact would that have on this picture?
Mr. Chairman, I think Director Cox asked some very good questions. Obviously, he's had some experience in this area. Having said that, we are planning on having discussions with the governor and ultimately the legislature about how we can fund positions that go forward, because what the legislature put into effect was essentially the requirement that agencies cannot exceed their 100 series budget. And so there was a lot of creep, there was a lot of discussion that reclassifications and occupational studies just added to what they called the position pay creep. And some of that is true because, at least for the general fund, that can have some impact down the road. So the budget division is managing that very closely to make sure that when agencies go in front of the Joint Appropriations Committee, their 100 series is not every year getting bigger and bigger. But having said that, we also know that one of the concerns we have, and one of the concerns I have personally, and you've heard me say it several times here today, is that we have a lot of money invested in the Hay system, and a lot of effort have gone to that. And we want to make sure that our classification structure is accurate. So we need to classify people appropriately for doing the work that they're doing. So we are looking at discussing a couple alternatives with the governor and with the legislature about how we can queue up these occupational studies, if you will, so that if there is a cost impact, there can be full disclosure about what that cost impact is going to be, and then we can go forward and we can look and see if there's money within the budget, or maybe there's a reserve of funds that we can draw from, or maybe it's a budget ask of the legislature to pay for those occupational studies. So in the past, when agency budgets went in front of the legislature, somehow the 100 series just got adjusted in agency budgets. And then with the concerns recently with the revenue shortfall, actually this was before that, there was the stipulation by the legislature that agencies can't exceed their 100 series. So it has slowed things down. The other thing I would say is that I know that we have several occupational studies that have been in process that have now come to a halt because of the situation the state's in with the hiring freeze that the governor just implemented. So we're hoping to figure out a strategy on how we can move forward with those, but at this time we are under a hiring restriction, as well as reclassifications have been halted. That comes to a disappointment, I think, to some employees and some agencies, but I'm hoping that it's temporary and we can find a solution to move forward with it.
Okay. Any further discussion or questions from this
Mr.
meeting?
Chairman.
Dave?
Director Fawcett or Tricia, just a quick question, just for my personal information. I know that we had some lingering occupational studies that went across agency lines. Are those been put on hold, or will they be looked at in the same process and manner that you've just said that you have a new form that's going to come out? So is that going to be a new process for those occupational studies?
There are a couple occupational studies, as you know, that were happening, and we're going to be released right before the budget freeze. They are on hold. 2 of them are done, 1 is still in process. We don't really know, we don't have an expectation of releasing anything until the budget freeze is done. And I can't remember what the second part of your question was.
So were there's 3 pending occupational groups?
I
that are
believe
still
there were
pending?
3. There's the HR study, driver services, and there's a third one I can't think of right now.
Skilled trades.
Yes.
That's right. Okay, thank you.
Further discussion? Questions?
I'd just like to follow up that the governor did release a memorandum to all state directors on October the 6th, which mandated a budget reduction as well as position freezes. So there currently is a process that agency directors are working with the governor's office to go through and review vacancies. There's approximately 825 classified vacancies in state government right now, but we know that a number of those vacancies, it's essential that we have to fill them. Some of them are public health and safety, some are public security types of positions. So each vacancy is being reviewed currently to determine how critical it is, and we are working through that process. It has slowed things down, but I think at the end of the day, the message you need to know is that the governor is anticipating using some of this vacancy savings to offset the revenue shortfall with the state. So we're working through this process. There's a committee that's reviewing these exception requests from agency directors. They're ultimately approved by the governor before any are unfrozen, if you will. So we expect that process to continue for a period of time until we know more of what the picture of the future looks like.
Okay. If that covers that, then we're in line for a 10 or 15-minute break real quick. Who wants to take a restroom break or run right back? It's going to be a short break, and then we'll start up again. We'll cover requests received from employees and then public comment. So in about 15 minutes, we'll be here. Well, let's make it 10, about 10 till 10 to 3. We'll pick back up. This was the opera, I'd flash the lights, you know how they dim the lights, flash them, signal to get back to your seats, or you'll have to find them in the dark. Next up on the agenda is the request received from the employees. Committee members will turn to that section, and who's got this one, Dean or Tricia? Okay.
Mr. Chairman, we have, you have in your packet some of the requests from employees, and I can read through those and then either discuss them or discuss who's going to respond to the employees directly. The first one is regarding pay increases based on PMI ratings. If you receive, this employee comments that if you receive a poor rating, you can contest it and have it reviewed. There's no option for someone who has received what they believe is an unfair review, which results in a loss of potential pay increases, as Dean has discussed earlier. What safeguards could be established to assist good employees from inaccurate reviews? Could a section be added to the PMI rating so that an employee could rate the supervisor? I know there is a comment section available to leave what they say is a rant, but that may not have any productive focus to it. If a simple check the box to rate the supervisor's skill qualification to supervise according to state standards, poor or unqualified supervisors could be trained and or rated on their PMI per their ability at the employee level to supervise. Employee turnover may be averted by offering a format that allows them to be heard and keep supervisors/employee relationships in check. So that is the first comment.
I think the first thing that stood out with me when I read that is the difference between a poor rating and an unfair. I mean, there is a procedure to follow if you feel like the evaluation wasn't fair or you received a poor rating, one or the other. I mean,
Currently, the personnel rules say that you can grieve an unsatisfactory rating, so anything below, anything that is unsatisfactory. You can grieve the process other than that. So if you have, for example, a competent rating, but you believe you should have been commendable, you can't grieve that rating.
Okay.
You can grieve the process.
okay.
So there's a slight difference there.
And Mr. Chairman, I would just add that our PMI system has a number of checks and balances. It may not be perfect, but the evaluator, when they complete their rating, it has to be reviewed by that evaluator's supervisor. So there's at least 2 levels of review of the employee's performance before the employee receives that rating. So I don't know the particular circumstances in this employee's case. Could be a small agency. We would need to look into that further. But the point I'm trying to make is that there are some checks and balances in the PMI system if it's used appropriately.
Okay. Any questions about this committee or discussion or?
So I think our intent is to look into this further and respond back to the
Okay.
employee. We certainly will provide the Compensation Commission with our responses before we notify the employee.
But I think what I'm hearing is that we think the procedure is in place for them to contest or to file some type of, just doing this. I mean, bringing it to our attention here as a commission, that you're going to look into it further. And
I think we need to look at the individual circumstances in the agency and report back to the commission on what we found.
okay. Moving on then. Next one.
The second request for review discusses insurance premiums. This employee and his wife both work for the state of Wyoming. Like so many other couples, we are split on our insurance. My issue with the split premium is that we pay the same monthly as an employee with a family, being the only one working for the state. To me, this means that one of us is not receiving the monetary benefit provided for employees' insurance. If you were to calculate the amount that is paid by the state for a lone employee for insurance premium and multiply it by 2 for a split, the state would owe us money every month for having insurance. This is not what I'm asking for, but I do believe that the people on a split premium should be receiving a discount. Please take my request under consideration. This is more of a historical / complicated issue that I believe that Ralph is here to actually answer that question or give you guys a little bit of history on what happened with the split premium. If you have a minute, Ralph.
Ralph, would love to hear from you.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Ralph Hayes. I'm the manager of the Employees and Officials Group Insurance Program. Now, when I started here 14 years ago, the employer contribution looked significantly different than it did today. It was a situation where employees received 100% a single and nothing was paid for any dependents who were added onto the program. Ultimately, the health plan was getting into fairly severe financial problems because of adverse selection. Because every time there's a rate increase, the healthy dependents were abandoning the program, going to private insurance, which was leaving us a much sicker and sicker pool of employees, which was having a negative impact on our premiums. A different methodology needed to be worked on. That was worked on originally under Geringer, and right at the end, his portion, Governor Friedenthal took that up, and we established an 85% employer contribution, but there were trade-offs. First of all, and this was by design, this was going to have a significant budgetary impact to the state to start providing some kind of employer contribution for these dependents. Second of all, there was a feeling that every employee should have some kind of skin in the game. Because when you get something for free, you often don't really appreciate what you have. So that was put into place, and part of that process was the establishment of this split premium. Now what this does is it takes a family contribution and it splits the employer contribution by each participating entity that they work for. So this doesn't put the burden all on the federal program or under a generally funded program. It splits it evenly. It provides neither an advantage or a disadvantage to a family plan where both employees work for a participating entity. So it's neutral, if you will. But even then, when we made the switch from 2 singles to this one, they got a 2% increase at that point in time. So that new family employer contribution was more than was being provided before. In comparison to the singles, who now had an out-of-pocket expense, and at that point, that was almost 50% of the employees. So therefore, what you have is a situation, it's fair as equal access out there. It's the same cost, I agree, but it's no more cost either. It's neutral.
Okay. Any questions for Ralph from the committee? We feel their pain. Well, we're on the same boat. Cost more, cover less.
The third request for review I have requests the Commission to establish law and amend policy to enable correctional post-certified security staff the option of lawfully carrying a firearm during their commute to and from work to all Wyoming correctional facilities, and includes documentation on the policies for the Department of Correction regarding carrying handguns on property.
Trying to find out which one you're on here. Did you slip one in on us?
Did I skip one? I'm sorry.
Got you, okay.
I went to number 4 instead.
Got you,
of
okay.
going to
I'm with you
number
now.
3. So that's something that can be answered by ANI HRD on your behalf. I think we can establish that you don't have the ability to establish law regarding the correctional officers to and from the Wyoming, either the Penn or the Medium Correctional Facility.
Okay. On that last one, on the split insurance, I'm sure that you'll send a letter to explain.
Yes, yes,
Okay,
Chairman,
good
we will
enough.
send it
Okay.
later.
Mr. Chairman,
John, you
just a
have a
quick question on the corrections question. Is this an internal policy issue with the corrections, with the DOC?
I believe it is an internal policy with DOC. I assume it's a
Okay.
security issue
Mhm.
with having vehicles parked at the Penn or at WMCI with gun racks and I believe that's probably part of the policy, but we will address that with DOC.
I believe it's also state law that you're under the concealed carry, you can't have carry your gun on state property.
Right, and there's that as well. Just like as an employee, you can't have a handgun in this building, as an employee.
Mr. Chairman, that's a State Building Commission policy, so it affects all facilities in state government.
Did you know that, Representative?
No, I didn't, but I assume
You want to check your gun at the door then?
I assume he can use a gun when he gets to work.
Okay.
And like I said, the same as this one, we will respond on the
Okay.
behalf. And we'll let you review it before we send it up. And switching back to the one I skipped over, unfortunately. Years ago, we used to get paid twice a month. Then it was decided that getting paid once a month would cut down on paper. Now that we are paperless, can we go back to getting paid twice a month? We plow snow all hours, all winter long, and our overtime is being held almost 2 months in some cases. This should at least be paid on a seconded payroll. Now that we have all of this computer stuff, there should be no reason that being paid more often would cost us more. Thanks for taking the time to hear our concerns and keep up the good work you do.
I like the reasoning. There's more than just paper involved here, isn't there? There's time, payroll.
Correct, and there's a cost associated with running payroll twice a month, but that's certainly a request of the commission that we can answer as well and bring that to you, that letter to you, and before we send it back out to the employee. So unless, I don't know what they used to do on being paid twice a month, and I'm
Yeah, how long ago was that? When was that change made? Do you know, Dean?
A long time ago.
Long time.
And this is certainly an item that we'll discuss with the state auditor's office and forming a response for you.
Mr. Chair?
Rita?
Yes. Tricia, yeah, it's about being paid twice a month, but what is this issue about the hours for overtime that seem to really lag into input into the system? It seems like if this gentleman could at least have that more congruent with the twice monthly pay rather than that lagging so far, because he's asking really two questions there.
And I would have to clarify that with the gentleman with the question, but my understanding is what he's saying is that I'm working overtime up until the last pay period, or that next Monday, which is on the next pay period, he's waiting for another full month and sometimes a month and a half before he gets that second paycheck with the overtime in it. That I do not believe that there is a case that we're holding any kind of overtime
Right.
for a
Past the
longer
next
period
It's
of
pay
got to be
time.
a timing issue.
Correct. I believe it's a timing issue, but I can verify that as well.
Okay.
Thank you.
And I believe there's one last one. It's after the policies from DOC. I would like the Compensation Commission to review the inequities in pay for principal engineers between YDOT and DEQ, as well as the inequities within YDOT. I have attached documentation. There's 8 pages in total. My understanding of the HAY system was to make pay equitable for the various classifications. One other concern is that A&I has not performed annual salary surveys since 2009, as mandated by state compensation policy. So not only are YDOT wages lagging behind other agencies, but we are falling behind the current markets. I would like the Compensation Commission to review my request, although I won't be able to attend the meeting in person. This issue has to deal with classifications of principal engineers that we have in multiple agencies. The matrix, the merit matrix, the compensation matrix allows for a 10% difference in pay. So for example, if YDOT brings in a principal engineer at a certain amount, but DEQ brings them in at MPP, there's going to be a difference in those two principal engineers. It's up to the agency to have more flexibility to bring in their employees where they want to, up to MPP. Unfortunately, if one agency is bringing in an engineer at MPP and another one is bringing them below, appears to be an inequity. The other issue has to do with compression. If you have an employee who is a principal engineer, we believe compression. If there's an employee who comes in an agency that has multiple supervisors above them, and that engineer is not as responsible as a DEQ engineer or a YDOT engineer, then that's where the inequity can be found. It appears to be an inequity. So there's multiple reasons why there might be difference in pay. There is the permission to have through the range, a 10% range in pay. So that's kind of where you have the issue where one employee from one agency sees a principal engineer in, for example, DEQ that gets paid higher than he gets paid in YDOT for the same amount of time, same amount of years, but they're brought in at MPP. Are there any questions about that? It's something that we will answer. It's a complicated issue with compensation. It's something that we will answer in depth. It has already been answered, just so everybody knows. It has been answered one time, but we can, again, address it. It was answered through a governor's request. So.
Okay, John.
Mr. Chairman, in the same packet of information, you'll see a letter signed by me as YDOT director at the time.
Don't you hate that when that happens?
And
It's happened to me too.
so I probably ought to offer some comment here. This, I'll try to give this in a nutshell. Incidentally, this it's an understandable question that's being asked by Mike Garner, and like so many state employees, this is truly one of the good high-performing folks that we've got with a tremendous amount of responsibility on the ground. If you look at the letter that I wrote to Chief of Staff Kerry Gray in March of this year, at the bottom of page 1, I'll just point out a couple of things to you here. First of all, Mike's question is relative to the classification of principal engineer, which is titled principal engineer under the Hay system. That encompasses, if I count right, 6 different agencies, but the vast majority of those principal engineer classified employees are at YDOT, okay? So you see the class code there, you see the minimum, the MPP, and the maximum. So the range allows for pay to fall within those figures. Then you see how the pay is disparate between, in this case, primarily DEQ and YDOT. But the sheer number of principal engineers who are employed by YDOT literally drives the statewide median in this case. And I did take the time at the governor's request. I responded on behalf of the governor, and it could be that there could be some merit, I suppose, in a response from this commissioner or commission chair or something like that. But talked with Mike, explained the situation to him. But if you look at page 2 of that letter, I would tell you that there really are 2 issues specific to the agency, and it's less of an overarching issue because I don't know what the task load is, what the responsibility is, and and strictly speaking, I don't know what the placement is within DEQ of their principal engineers. And I certainly don't want to err by calling this a generic title because these people have to meet the qualifications to be so classified. But the placement, assignment, responsibilities, budget responsibility, and all those kind of things are assessed by A&I, if I understand the drill. And that arrives at, that informs at least where the agency can go with this. But specific to YDOT, with 57 people in that classification, there's a couple things that are worth pointing out here. One is that all of those principal engineers are within roughly $200 a month of one another, which is a very appropriate spread. I would tell you in all fairness to the A&I position or the Hay methodology position, that 10%, up to 10% doesn't constitute an inequity. When you're talking about meat and potatoes on the table, that can be a lot of money, and it's actually reflected in these figures on page 1 of my letter. So it would be fair to say that at the employee level, there's going to be a complete disagreement with an assertion that 10% does not constitute an inequity. That said, within the ranks of YDOT and within the ability of YDOT to pay their principal engineers, and then what Trish alluded to, how that relates to the next class of engineers up in terms of rank within the agency, all of those things had to be taken into account. But the bottom line is that even if I were to gain A&I, the green light from A&I and permission from the governor's office to move that class of engineers at YDOT up, even if I could reconcile whatever, that there wouldn't be undue compression and all of that, you can see the figure that would be, that would impact the highway fund. And so it was simply, we can argue the concept, we can compare notes with, or we can compare qualifications and assignments with DEQ, which is an extent to which we did not go. But the sheer economics of it would probably have rendered it virtually impossible for me in that position, because it would have been $250,000 a year out of the budget, and that was a non-starter in these times. So it's kind of a multifaceted problem. I understand Mike's position on that. What I don't know is how his job as a principal engineer compares to the job of principal engineer at DEQ, and that's, I don't know if it demands study. Those two agencies are the ones that employ the most, that are classified in that way. But I don't know if the Hay methodology really speaks to equity in the sense of should a transportation engineer, a resident engineer, be classified the same as a DEQ engineer. Those are among the things that I just didn't know enough about to even speak to that.
What's your ideas and thoughts?
I think
A&I?
Director Cox explained it quite well. I think that's one of the problems, is when you give the flexibility of the agencies to bring in MPP or another, or lower, depending on what their budgets are. We're going to see this across the board. Agencies are able to bring them in at MPP or below. If an agency can afford to bring them in at MPP, then that's what they do. Somebody who's classified the same at A&I is going to be paid differently than somebody who is classified the same at Homeland Security. So with that flexibility, we also run into these issues as well. But I don't know whether a principal engineer at YDOT and a principal engineer at DEQ, I don't know that answer. I'm in the same boat on whether they actually do the same job. I'm assuming their JCQs are the same, their degrees are the same, but what their responsibilities are may differ, may be exactly the same. I'm not sure what that is, and we can find that out too.
But as Mr. Cox was just explaining, even if we were to resolve this issue, there's still that budgetary constraint that not only was he under then, but we still are. I mean, with
If
the
not
conditions.
worse now.
If not worse.
Mr. Chairman, I would just add that this commission worked with the Human Resources Division not too long ago to make a modification to the state compensation policy that gave agencies more flexibility. So with that flexibility, then comes the ability of agencies to adjust salaries, but the issue remains is that the funding has to be available for agencies to make those. So we're not all funded alike, we're funded differently. I would go on and say that I doubt that the engineer at YDOT and the engineer at DEQ are doing exactly the same duties, but they're both engineers, so they're in the same classification. So our compensation policy has allowed this difference of pay, if you will, but when you start looking at how that impacts employees, it takes a more detailed analysis to come to a conclusion.
The other thing that he mentioned here that I highlighted was the salary survey since 2009. Is that pretty accurate?
Mr. Chairman, I think you just heard me say that the Hay Group did the salary survey in 2013.
Right.
And within the last 2 years, we have adjusted our pay tables. So I would say prior to that, we had not done an official salary survey that adjusted the pay tables, but that has been all rectified in the last 2 years.
That is the last of the written requests.
Well, what can we do on this particular one? I mean, with the budget constraints, even if we were to resolve the disparity between the classifications of these engineers, I mean, suggestions from A&I?
I think that the response from Director Cox was thorough. I do believe that something from this entity would be helpful. I think if we can get a little more information, maybe explain that we did do a study in 2013, get something prepared for the commission to look at before we respond. But I think it's important to respond to him in this case because it is an issue that is probably going to be coming up more and more with the flexibility of the agencies to pay MPP or not. So I don't think it's just going to be this issue.
Well,
And
the
I think,
timing,
unfortunately, I think that he may have expected the governor to respond and doesn't understand the blue sheet process.
Yeah.
So I want to make sure that we do respond in one way or the other again to him. But we can prepare something for you.
That'd be good. I think the timing's critical too as we approach the budget session. And the governor appearing before JAC first week or 2 weeks in December. It'd be nice to get a letter on his desk from this commission, probably. So,
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to add one comment. Tagged on to what Dean said about the flexibility that has been given to agency directors to move appropriately and fairly between the entry level and MPP. That's one thing that as a state employer, I came and testified to this commission about that, the need for that, and I certainly am in favor of that. That said, you know, I don't know how you want to respond or want the agency to respond to Mike in this case, but the essence of my response to him was that in terms of future, figuring out where the future lies, I really believe that it'll hinge on, one, whether or not the director of WYDOT and the Transportation Commission, which superintends this, sees it as being an issue that they choose to move on within that flexibility range given to the director of the agency. That'll be a decision that they could contemplate, and there's a bit of a holistic effort going on at WYDOT, I'm sure still, to assess employee compensation overall, particularly in light of the granting of that flexibility. So it's going to have to work together within that whole effort. But I would say that perhaps as reassurance to the legislators on this committee, that if any adjustment is made upward, it can be done in a revenue neutral way in terms of general fund impact because it doesn't have any, it's highway fund decisions that have to be made.
so my point is if we wanted to draft a letter of the timing, how would we do that? Your agency would probably draft a letter on behalf of this commission and we could review it, sign it, and try to get it to the governor, making him aware of this concern. And
Well, we'll certainly make the governor aware of the concern. We can draft a letter for this committee to review and then determine where we should forward that letter or if we should take the concern further.
And then the response to this particular employee, I guess just notifying him that we're taking up the issue. But there's two things,
Right.
with the budget constraints is one, and that we'll probably have more control over what we do here but that we're aware of it and that we're taking it up. Anything else?
That's the last of the written requests.
Okay. Okay then. Moving on, that leads us to the public comment. Anybody in the audience today that has anything to bring before the commission? Quiet group. I don't know if that's good or bad. Is there anything else from the department?
One last item, in talking with Amy Bittner with Economic Analysis regarding the housing studies, it's, for the next meeting, it would be helpful because that quarter comes out about the first week in April, and then it takes her a while to compile that information and analyze it. If the meeting could be held the third week of April or after, would be appreciated by the Economic Division, so Economic Analysis Division.
Okay.
That's the only other thing.
Then we need to set the date for our April meeting. Committee members, ideas, thoughts? Mr. Co-Chair?
Just make sure it isn't the 14th or the 15th, because I'll be working on my taxes.
Mr. Chair, can I?
Yes, John, go ahead.
I guess I should apologize for talking so much today. I did have one curiosity question. This is really kind of traceable to working on the other side of the table with some commissions and in the transportation world. But during the orientation with A&I, found myself wondering if there would be any merit to this commission considering a phone conference for perhaps strictly for the purpose of approving the minutes sometime between, with a reasonable time period given to the commission secretary to compile those minutes. In other words, moving and approving those minutes so they can be made a matter of public record sooner than 6 months down the road the next time we have a meeting, just in terms of public access to those.
Committee's thoughts?
Could we do it vis-a-vis emails?
Is that allowed?
I would say so.
I think that's a good idea. I think we should have those minutes out quickly. And, not to rush them, but whenever they get them done, give us, we do this for other committees too, just give a week or something, and we come back, the vote comes in as you approve it or you don't, or you want to correct it.
And I would remind Mr. Chairman that everybody that the meeting is being live streamed and it will be up fairly quickly. So
Yeah.
if there is a question on that the public wants to know what happened on a vote, if that's the case, they can find it that way. So I do believe we can have the meeting's minutes accomplished in a couple weeks or 30 days and then get them to you and
Copied, sent to us email, and then we could respond.
approve them.
Okay. Sounds good, committee members? Keep us more up to date, okay? I don't think we need a formal vote on that. I think it's just a good idea, and I think we can
Yeah.
carry that forward and do that through email. Okay, back to the meeting date in April. We have the calendars out. We usually try to stay on the first of the week or towards the end of the week, and so helps us with traveling over the weekend. I guess we could start with the department. What days are good for A&I?
Mr. Chairman, we're flexible. Whatever date works best for you, we can accommodate.
I think everybody's flexible right now because the legislature hasn't set their interim topics yet or meeting dates. But this will be good. We can set it and then
Yeah,
plan around it.
Right, we can maybe make a back.
So what's your thought, Representative Madden?
Well, let me see here.
Mondays, Saturdays, and
Yeah.
Sundays.
Well, yeah, I'm open.
Not this week.
No, I don't want to do it the 14th and 15th.
You gonna do it after?
Well,
Before?
yeah,
Before?
I think what was your constraint on timing? It seemed like you have issue there?
So typically, the fourth quarter cost of living index is produced the first week of April.
we better
Once
get-
I've published that data, then I have to provide the information to Human Resources in preparation for the commission meeting. They usually need that a week ahead of time. So last commission meeting, it was April 10th, and I was really constrained in
Let's go later.
I published the cost of living on the 1st, but you guys need it like a week ahead of time, so I got it done in like a day. And it was just really difficult to get it all done.
Well, how
'Cause
about the 20th?
The next
Would
week?
that work?
That's fine.
Somewhere in there?
That's
20th?
Director Cox will be gone that week, but how about the week following? The last week?
I'll be
25th through the 29th, somewhere in there?
I'm
What's
good
the rest
with
of the
those days
committee?
too.
25th is good.
25th.
25th
What day
would be a
of the week's
Monday?
the phone? Okay. Yeah,
Oh.
that'd be good.
25th a Monday? Going once? Twice? Okay, we set it for Monday, the 25th?
And thank you for considering the schedule.
Well, thank you for
Well,
bringing
I
it to our
remember we had
attention.
to do
yeah.
that one other time.
25th of April then, right? Well, we don't know where it's going to be. Is it going to be in this building?
It will not be.
It won't.
Put on your hard hats, go to work. Probably in the Jonah Building somewhere?
Good.
Is a possibility. We will let you know of the location.
Try to find us if you can. Somewhere here in Cheyenne. Yeah, usually, Mr. Chairman, Co-Chairman, Chairman of these have the prerogative of setting the meetings where we want to.
Yeah. Well.
And we want to go up to Cali?
We also need to have a quorum, so.
Oh, that's true. All right.
I have you remember, Mr. Chairman, we talked about the difficulty that Penn has in hiring people, and we
Yeah.
went into some, various exercises on trying to alleviate that, and there's a lot of big challenges, and I happened to see in the paper a while back that, I can't remember if they said they had a 30% vacancy rate in their employees, or 30 people or something. But it struck me as being significant, and I'm just wondering if the executive branch is working on doing that. It seems like, with this freeze and stuff, you kind of hate to just turn your back on that. If there's something we can be doing, we need to be doing it, but maybe there's nothing we can do.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Madden, I can give you a little bit of update with that. I do know that the Department of Corrections is still struggling to fill correctional officer positions. That's historically been the case. That's not a new event. The governor's office, as well as A&I, is very aware of that, and we've been working with the Department of Corrections. A&I met with the director of Corrections, Bob Lampert, and he proposed a number of changes to compensation, which we vetted fully with him and his department and took to the governor's office. So some of those things are currently in place since, I don't know if it was since their last commission meeting or earlier, but they are looking at things as far as helping recruit employees. There's I believe there's a sign-on for pay when an employee comes on. If an employee recruits someone else, there's an opportunity for compensation, as well as looking at ways of advancing correctional officers through the pay system quicker. Originally, it was deemed to be based on post-certification, if you recall our conversation.
Right.
I think the Department of Corrections has changed a little bit of their methodology, how they want to approach that, but those conversations are still going on between A&I and Corrections. I do know that the Department of Corrections is being very aggressive in their recruitment efforts, so I personally have heard radio advertisement and things of that, trying to recruit folks to work primarily in Rollins, but in other places. So we are working with the Department of Corrections, and being on the exception review committee, I do know that we are not penalizing the Department of Corrections if they have folks that are willing to come and be corrections officer, by all means, we're going to unfreeze those vacancies so that they can fill them. So I don't believe that the hiring freeze at this point would be having an extreme negative consequence to the Department of Corrections.
Thank you.
It's pretty much throughout the DOC, isn't it? It's not just site-specific in one community. It's,
I think Rollins was the worst.
It is statewide, but from my knowledge of the Department of Corrections, the biggest challenge is at Rollins at the state penitentiary.
I would think with the sugar plant in Torrington going down, 200 employees available, that might help with Torrington facility. But
Sure.
Yeah. Well, seems like it's a headache, but it looks like you've been working on it.
trying to address it.
And it's not going to be part of that freeze, so that's good, I think.
Any other business before the committee?
Nope. No.
Then our next meeting is April 25th, 1 p.m., somewhere here in Cheyenne. All right. Thank you, Department. Good job. Thank you, everybody. Appreciate you. Meeting adjourned.